Hello, good afternoon. My name is Mustafa. And we are organizing these AI Research Network series. I can see some familiar faces among us. And first of all, sorry for our under preparation. Indeed, I'm having Paula and team and everyone here as a guest. I just said I need to impress them. I need to do best. So guess what happened? We are working with one of the admin support person, and she was out last week, and we've been directed with different person, and she just forgot to put these food orders. But don't worry, Sagun ran out, and right now we are about to get our pizzas and some drink and other stuff. We are going to have a pizza party, much better than sandwich party. So let me introduce the purpose of these AI Research Network and AI Research and Networking series. We are trying to highlight the impressive work related to AI happening on campus. We have already hosted more than 5-6 different research happen in different department, different school. We hosted first psychology department, business school. We are having communication people and English department. The purpose that create a collaborative platform that people can cross-pollinate some ideas and say, oh, that's interesting. Maybe we should work together to advance this AI and interdisciplinary research. And one of our main goal, thanks to Eric Hall's support, is apply for some of those national or federal, not necessarily federal, but some of those grants. And we identify a couple of these grants options. This is one of them, and we have another humanities grants that we are hoping to apply for. And we are building this research network. Those people can just put their impressive work to send our application. Indeed, when you look at this NSF grant last year, that is one of the favorite things I love to show it. And these are the NSF grant has been given last 8 years or 10 years. And one of the NFS grant was giving AI Institution for Engaged Learning. And it is NC State. And I just ask myself, why we are not getting something like that? Hopefully, and they received $15 million. Hopefully, we are going to do something similar to this work, and we are hoping to get some grant for advancing interdisciplinary AI research on our campus and maybe establishing an AI center. Apart from that, I just want to highlight one final stuff, then introduce our guest. We are organizing AI Pedagogy Challenge, and we are about to complete. That was open last almost 5 weeks. We started this challenge March 1st, and we are about to conclude, and we receive some application. If you're interested in, please submit it before Monday. And we are about to complete our research network, last 2 presentations, apart from today's. But let me introduce our guest speaker. So today we are hosting Dr. Paula Rosinski from English Department and Director of Writing across the university. Her scholarship center on professional and multimodal writing, exploring how emerging technologies, including generative AI, reshape writer process and product. And importantly, Paula was the first person to organize generative AI workshop on campus. 3 years ago, when the first ChatGPT just came, and we have been working with Paula last 3 years, and she's a great collaborator. And Dr. Tim Peoples, Senior Associate Provost Emeritus, Professor of Humanities and Senior Scholars with the Center for Engaged Learning. For more than 2 decades, he has championed faculty development writing across the curriculum initiative while studying high-impact engaged learning practices. And Dr. Travis Maynard, Assistant Professor of English, specializing in professional writing and rhetoric. His research investigates the writing beyond universities, focusing on multimedia, AI-enabled composing in the workplace and public context. Together, they are going to present today how AI being used in different contexts and whether it's going to automate or replace or augment writers. Please join me to welcome our co-author team. I'm going to set up.
Thanks, Mustafa. Thank you all for being here. So this is a presentation on a survey that we've done with alumni, and we're going to give you some results that we found from the survey and contextualize it otherwise also in our field and in some theories of technology. So we already had our introductions. So I'm going to situate this first in how new technologies tend to be received, and particularly new literacy technologies. One of the things that we would note is that, I don't know how many people may have read, it's very popular reading, Plato's Phaedrus. But in Plato's Phaedrus, he trashes writing and says it's going to bring doom to the Greek society. And so in the rise of literacy and writing in ancient Greece, you have a Platonic perspective, which is writing is going to bring doom, it's terrible. And then you have Isocrates on the other side, who I've spent several past years doing some deep study on, who says this is about opportunity. And Cleisthenes builds it into the democratic process, so it becomes built into the Athenian democratic city. So we have different ways of seeing that new technology being adopted in that case. If you look at the history of public libraries, of television, of radio, and of the internet, you're going to see similar bimodal responses to these new technologies. Believe it or not, public libraries were seen as terrible when they first were coming out. Why would we share all of this knowledge with just anybody? You need to be a certain kind of somebody to have access to this kind of knowledge. That was one side of it. The other side was, no, this is going to bring us democracy. We're all going to have access to information. Internet, similar kind of thing. I don't know how many people lived through the rise of the internet. I was coding in HTML when that was happening, and it was supposed to bring either utopia or doom. It was going to bring one of the two. You can also see this Murat is an investigative journalist who did a deep dive into those people in the industry of AI, deep into the industry of AI, lived with them for a while. And what he found was, this is exactly what he found, this bimodal response. It was either going to bring about utopia, AI was going to do everything and we were just going to be free to have a good time, or it was going to bring about our extinction. So even worse than doom, we'll talk about just complete human extinction. This reflects, Andrew Feinberg is a critical theorist of technology, and he talks about three kinds of approaches to technology. One is an instrumentalist approach, which sees technology as a neutral tool. It can be used for good or bad. There's also a substantive approach to technologies, which sees in the technologies there's already a deterministic force. It will lead us into a direction, one way or the other. We have no power over it. And then he proposes a critical approach where he sees technology as an ambivalent scene of struggle. Feinberg is a Marxist, a post-Marxist. We're not taking up that particular position, but we see some relation with the work that we're doing. So our orientation to this is maybe what you call a new materialist orientation, where we see GenAI, which is our focus, not AI in general, but generative AI, as an entangled actant in education, meaning it's something we're going to wrestle with. And our job is to wrestle well. That's essentially what we're trying to argue here. It's not a destination, it's not a neutral tool, but it's part of the scene of struggle, and we're going to have to struggle with it. And we're trying to share with you some of what we're finding about how people are struggling with it and using it, and how that might inform the kind of struggle we might want to move towards. So based on our research, we identify ethics as a key point of intervention in this scene of struggle. And we want to engage this scene of struggle from within our area of study, which is writing studies, and that's what we're going to talk about today. We have 4 kinds of intervention strategies that we will talk about in our conclusion. One is to treat GenAI as a collaborator. One is to teach prompt engineering as a new emerging rhetorical activity. One is to develop and advance GenAI integrated pedagogies more actively, and some of it we're going to have to generate. Some will be able to pick off other past experiences that we've had in our field. And also build individualized training modules for transfer. What we find, you'll see what we find is a lot of people are teaching themselves. And transfer is one of the things that we're focusing on in writing studies, which is moving what you learn in one place and being able to find some way to transfer it to another context. So that's what we're after. So how did we do this study? I'll give you a brief overview of methods. We won't go into this a whole lot in demographics. So we did a survey. It went out to about 19,000 alumni between 93 and 2023. We worked with the provost office. This is one of several surveys that we have sent out about writing since we had the QEP in writing in 2013 launched. That was our last QEP. And so this is one of the largest groups we've sent it out to. The response rate, you can see it's not huge. It's about half what we've had in other surveys. It's good for our field. Those numbers are pretty good for our field in total. And one of the things at the bottom that you can see is we hypothesized because we added GenAI into this survey that we lost some people in the process. They're just like, this is nowhere in my world view, and so I'm just not even going to participate in this survey. So that probably brought our numbers down a little bit in the survey. That's a hypothesis, we're just guessing. So we asked 3 kinds of questions: demographic questions, quantitative questions, and qualitative questions. You can see the categories that we are asking. This is primarily focusing people on their professional writing experiences. So the writing they're doing in professional contexts. And then we added to this, we've asked those kinds of questions before, we added to this a focus on GenAI and how it's integrated into that work. We also asked a big, broad, qualitative question. What else do you want to tell us? They told us stuff, and you're going to see a little bit about what they told us. Demographics look very much like our institutional profile in terms of gender, in terms of majors, in terms of race and ethnic identity. So it's so for us internally to look at this, it's pretty representative. What's not representative is, even though education is a minority industry that our alums go into, it was the largest industry response we had. Not a surprise. Probably because of the nature of the question we're asking. And this is also an industry that's responding vociferously around AI being integrated. What is this going to do to the work that we do? So we're not surprised that we had a high response rate from education. All right, and I want to pass it off to Paula.
Okay, thank you. Hello, can everybody hear me? Is this close enough? All right. So we looked at a couple different areas of research to frame our study, and the first one we're going to talk about is AI in industry. And so early on in 2023 and a bit before, there was a lot of talk about how this would impact the labor market and how there was a lot of talk of efficiency. How could people be more efficient with AI? And there's a lot of talk about enhanced decision making because people could get better information quicker with AI, and also the automation of repetitive tasks. And then in 2024 and beyond, it starts to kind of expand a bit, and we start to get more discussion about augmentation versus automation. And the idea is that there's a lot of prediction, which jobs will disappear, which jobs will become more popular, which tasks will disappear, which tasks will go away, these sorts of things. And the general idea is that repetitive tasks or tasks like administrative work or call centers would be automated, whereas tasks that involve critical thinking, higher order critical thinking, and interaction with people are more likely to be augmented. There's a lot of forecasting happening with what's going to happen in the labor market, and there was some forecasting of which jobs and skills might become automated versus augmented. And so the World Economic Forum's Future of Jobs Report 2025 has a lot of fascinating things in there, but they did predict that about 15% reduction in the work tasks between 2025 and 2030, with 82% being from automation and 19% being from augmentation. And then some fields are even expected to grow with AI and augmentation. Again, fields that have a lot of human interaction, higher order critical thinking, like healthcare, STEM, and finance. And then there are some studies that tried to look at what was actually happening out there in the labor world with augmentation and automation. And so Anthropic, who owns Claude, did this really innovative methodological study where they studied millions of anonymous Claude conversations across the labor market, across different positions. And they concluded that AI use was really being concentrated in the software development and in technical writing. So they said augmentation was more common than automation as well. So for us, for our study, this means it confirms that AI is being used a lot in professional writing and especially in the technical writing fields. And that AI is shaping professional writing practices right now as we speak. So we might want to study how to intervene in the development of AI so they work more how we need them to work or how we want them to work, but also we want to be involved actively shaping how AI impacts the writing process, how we're teaching students to write with AI, and also to develop new writing strategies that integrate AI as well. Another way we could look at what's happening in the labor market is to look at demand for training, AI training. And again, the World Economic Forum's Future of Jobs report studied Coursera enrollment data. And they found that there was huge demand across the world globally, but it was really concentrated in the US and in India. But the reasons why people in those countries were seeking out training was quite different. So in the US, it was individually motivated, and they were looking for training that was transferable, some foundational skills like prompt engineering, and also ethics, how to behave ethically when you're using AI. But in India, it was more corporate driven, and people were looking to solve specific problems when they were on the job. So for us, this tells us, of course, there's growing AI industry use, but that professionals are seeking out AI training and how to write effectively in their professions. They're looking for prompt engineering training and other transferable AI writing skills. So do we want to be actively involved in shaping new writing processes that integrate AI and develop new writing strategies? Travis.
Thank you, Paula. So the second area that we really wanted to look at in terms of our literature review is really sort of seeing what was happening in the discipline of writing studies. And the initial sort of reactions in the sort of 2023, 2024 era, I think really sort of mimicked and reflected the discourse in higher ed more broadly, really sort of taking a Platonic stance of this is going to kill critical thinking, it's going to kill writing as we know it, and really trying to sort of mourn that and panic to a certain degree as a kind of knee-jerk reaction. And so there is a sort of coalescing of different sort of axioms or different ways of approaching writing in writing studies that are gathering under this umbrella term of refusal or resistance to AI. And so there are those ethical objections in terms of losing critical thinking inquiry, but then there are the other sort of larger issues of the potential environmental damage, economics, labor, and copyright, and then thinking about issues of bias and linguistic justice baked into those models. And so these are spaces that we're definitely open to in terms of discussion, but as the discourse has evolved within the field, it has sort of tried to embrace and integrate generative AI in different ways. So we're happy to discuss these during Q&A. We just wanted to take the moment to sort of recognize these were the initial kinds of reactions. As it has gone on, people are starting to integrate into the classroom. The first and foremost sort of place we're seeing that happen is in the classroom, really trying to develop new pedagogies, new types of assignments, trying to imagine what writing processes might look like in a post-AI world, and ensuring that we're teaching students to use the technology ethically. And then in the kind of more professional writing, technical writing field, we're seeing a lot of use cases in very specific contexts and very specific scenarios. And so that's where we see our alumni study sort of plugging in the field of writing studies. But since we went across disciplines, across 30 years of alumni, I think this study gives us a lot sort of broader of a portrait, a thumbnail sketch of what's happening across disciplines, across industries. So that's where we see ourselves plugging in terms of writing studies. To help us kind of frame that, we're looking to a field or a subfield called writing beyond the university. Tim mentioned the idea of writing transfer as being a sort of fundamental thing that we've been researching in the field for a long time now. Paula, Jesse, and Julia Blinkdy in the Center for Writing Excellence, they've dubbed this the second generation of transfer research. And really the difference between the first and second is first generation transfer research was looking how students transfer from first year writing to subsequent writing courses across the curriculum. Second generation has really tried to see what's happening after students leave the university. How are they taking that into professional, civic, and personal spaces? So that's happened in the field about 10 years ago, sort of looking at alumni of writing majors specifically, those like PWR here at Elon. I've done some previous alumni transfer work at my previous institution, and then in the field there is what's called writing across the lifespan, really sort of seeing how writing practices evolve well past professional life into retirement, really sort of writing across the lifespan. And so we're using those two sort of areas of writing studies to frame how we're intervening in the field, and this is the space that we really think we're able to speak back to the university and higher ed at large in terms of developing new writing pedagogies. And then finally, why alumni? It gives us that sort of glimpse into the real world experience, how people are actually using generative AI in the workplace, as well as giving them opportunities to speak back to their curricular experience, identifying both strengths and weaknesses at Elon specifically. And this allows for programmatic revision, both at a sort of discipline, major specific level, but then even potential implications for the core first year writing, those kinds of things. And then we just presented this at a conference, and there was a lot of student-focused data and perceptions and use of AI. And one of the sort of resounding questions or questions that got repeated often was, how do we know students are telling the truth? They could be sort of scared to ultimately sort of disclose for fear of repercussion. And so alumni don't lie, or at least they have less incentive to do so. So we're taking them at their word when they are talking about how they are using generative AI. And so we're going to switch into the quantitative, and before we dive into generative AI, we did want to kind of provide an overview of some of the more WEI-focused questions, how alumni are using writing more broadly. So Paula's going to walk us through that.
Thank you. So this is, as Travis said, data from this current study, but these broad writing questions do reflect questions we asked in 2018 with another survey as part of the Writing Excellence Initiative. So the first question is, what types of text are you creating in your professional writing? And the clear winner is emails, and with 146 instances. And this happened in 2018. That was the most commonly written genre. Other studies we've did with other populations, it's always emails. And other studies in our field, it's always email is number one. So it's not surprising to us, but I think sometimes other people do find it surprising. But we also see that they're writing a lot, and they're writing a lot of different genres, different types of texts, presentations, notes, spreadsheets, reports, and project management documents like agendas and planning documents, which are also very important. And the other thing I'd like to point out here is at the very bottom is essays or articles with 37 instances. And this is the writing that most closely resembles traditional academic writing, what we would call long form. So it really is not a type that is created, type of writing that's created frequently in the professional world. This chart is, we asked, how important are these skills to your writing, designing, and creating? And the clear winner here is adapting your writing to your purpose and your reader with 5.07 score out of 6. It was a 6-point scale. And so this is, wonderful to see. This is a very important rhetorical skill, and our alumni are saying that it is important to their writing lives. You'll see writing short and concise texts is not far behind with 4.39, copy editing or proofreading at 4.08, but also closely behind that are collaborating on your writing with others and giving and receiving feedback on your writing with others. Those are very close and pretty high up there, and we want to point this out because It's the kind of writing that students often think isn't valuable. They maybe complain about it more in class, but we do see here that they identify it after they graduate as important to their writing lives. And then again, at a bit lower, at 3.05, I think it's number 11 here, is writing lengthy texts. So again, that kind of longer form that's often considered traditional academic writing. Alumni are not reporting that these kind of skills are important to their writing lives. This text is how well did Elon prepare you for these writing tasks? And this is an important chart, but I'm going to skip and go to the next one where it compares how important are these writing tasks to your work and how well did Elon prepare you for them. So again, at the very top, we have adapting your writing to your purpose and style. And so Alumni indicated this is important to their writing lives with a score of 5.07, and pretty evenly is that they feel Elon prepared them pretty well to do that with 4.71. So those are pretty even. A bit more off is the next category, writing short and concise text. So alumni are saying they're writing it a lot with 4.39, and they're prepared pretty well, but there is more of a difference there. If you skip down to the collaborating on writing tasks with coworkers and giving and receiving feedback, these are pretty even. So alumni report that they're doing this a lot in the professional world. It's important to their writing lives, and that Elon prepared them well. So we were glad to see that. And then a bit further down, the biggest difference is again with writing lengthy text. The more traditional kind of academic writing would be the parallel. And students are prepared, alumni report 4.76 preparedness from Elon, which is way more preparedness than they're reporting it being important in their writing lives with a score of 3.05. And the last chart from this data is the importance of different Elon experiences to your writing life after graduation. And the top score with 4.84 is classes in your majors. So if we're thinking about how to teach students, how to integrate AI into the writing processes, into the writing they might be doing after graduation, majors would be a place to include this kind of instruction.
And so our next section is really sort of looking specifically at how alumni are using generative AI in their writing process. And so diving right in, it should be no surprise that most folks have heard of AI at this point. We see that only 10% are not familiar at all, 90% are at least somewhat familiar or slightly familiar with the technology. That should come as no surprise, both in terms of discourse in higher ed, but just sort of pop culture, things like the writer's strike, Super Bowl commercials. This is something that's permeating into the cultural consciousness. So that's not terribly surprising. However, it does seem that we're still kind of in an early adopter phase where we do have about 50% or so that are either never using it or using it less often than several times a month. And so this could suggest two things. Either we're still kind of in an early adopter phase, or it could be that people are still sort of resisting the technology. We didn't have a follow-up to really sort of address why they were never using, but those are two possible explanations. Overwhelmingly, we are seeing them write with generative AI in the professional writing setting. This is typically pretty consistent from previous alumni studies in terms of they are most often writing in the professional sphere, and then civic or community writing typically is very, very reported very lowly. Typically, personal writing is higher in a sort of non-AI alumni writing setting, but I think given the push for AI in that professional context, it makes sense that that number is even higher at this point. Looking again and sort of thinking about the ways in which they're actually using it, we're seeing that there is the perception in higher ed again that this is going to kill the writing process. Students are going to use this to generate long form essays and submit that. But the data here really sort of suggests that we're seeing it really being a tool for invention, trying to either brainstorm or generate ideas, or students are prompting to, not students, excuse me, alumni, are prompting to expand on things that they're already trying to develop, trying to flesh out. Drafting is a portion of that, but we also see that 31%, copy editing, proofreading, they're getting some type of feedback there, but drafting is the most important piece. Brainstorming, and then writing short texts, which aligns with the importance of writing concise texts in the sort of overall writing data. The one sort of, I'd say the most interesting piece of the quantitative data here is we divided all of the AI users, so that's an N of 177, and then a subgroup of power users. Those are the ones that are using it daily. several times a week or several times daily. And we're seeing a large disparity here in these specific types of writing tasks. And these are important to us in writing studies because they indicate kind of more advanced rhetorical thinking. They require a higher level of metacognition. So we're seeing that those who are using AI most frequently are using it for these more sort of in-depth rhetorical tasks. That could be because they are using it more frequently, they're learning the capabilities of the technology, or it could be that they are already strong writers and they're already thinking through those kinds of tasks. So this was something that we thought was interesting, and again, an opportunity for us in writing studies to really try to begin developing these in current students based on what we're seeing in alumni. In terms of impact and sort of what happens once they have sort of brainstormed, they've done this drafting, we're seeing, yes, AI is improving writing, but it's not doing so at an extreme level. We're only seeing that sort of slightly enhancing. It's not automating, it's only slightly augmenting at that point. As time goes on, we do intend to do this again. We might see that number sort of shift to the right, but for now, it's still sort of a moderate effect on the writing itself. In terms of what's happening for the writing processes, it is that sort of sense, and yes, writing processes are getting simplified, but they aren't getting fully automated, excuse me. So slightly simplified, moderately simplified, and then 14% there, very much so. So it's not making writing harder, which shouldn't be a surprise, but it's not completely overtaking those types of tasks. And then here we're seeing, although there was a relatively low number in terms of folks using AI for revision, maybe sort of human-centric revision, for lack of a better term, still remains an important part of the writing process, even when working with AI, where we have none at all being a 2%, a little 8%, but a moderate amount. So there is that sense in which developing skills to be able to edit, to be able to refine outputs is going to become a more prominent or an important part of writing processes after AI. And then...
So we asked them about where they are learning this stuff also, and these are the responses that we received. One of the things that you'll see in here is only about 8% of our responses show moderate to comprehensive level of training. So most people are not getting training at all. Inside of those numbers of those who are receiving training, only 19% of those said they received company training. So what we're finding, and since most of our respondents are within the United States, this aligns with previous data that we talked about in the US in comparison to India, is that most of the people in our data set at least are developing themselves through informal networks and informal just-in-time methods, which again is going to point to one of our suggested interventions that we're proposing for this. So this is one of the things that we're learning about this. In spite of the low percentage of training, I will also point out that we found out that over 50% of them report that their workplaces are or will likely be integrating GenAI into their workplace. That's what they are telling us. And that 58% of them believe it is somewhat or extremely likely that their employer will further integrate GenAI into their work processes. Surprisingly, though, after you hear that, only 68% are not at all or only a little anxious about GenAI replacing them as writers or influencing their work or replacing them as workers. So what we're seeing in this response rate is that people are, again, this talks to our augmenting, not replacing kind of orientation here, that the writing is being augmented, and they think that this is a tool that will continue to, that they'll just integrate into their work and they'll learn new work practices around that. Mine also? Nope, this is Paul's.
So in the qualitative data, this wasn't very overwhelming, but there was this small little thread of people talking about AI as ghoulish and soulless plagiarism that could hurt the practice of writing in all fields, but especially in creative writing. So we just wanted to point out that there is this fear. We can see that in the qualitative comments a little bit. I'm using repeatedly the terms ghoulish and soulless, but it didn't really pan out in the other quantitative data that we collected.
Again, we saw ethics as one of the points of intervention, and we saw a lot of a pronounced set of fears around legal kinds of fears, and you can see in these data sets. So again, comes from the question, anything else you want to share with us? So we're not prompting them. So this is just coming from what they want to share with us. And you can see a lot of fear in here. And not surprisingly, it's always fear of the other. They're not afraid of what they're going to do with the technology. They're afraid of what someone else might do to them with the technology or use the technology to do. So you'll see theft and thievery and copyright infringement and illegally sourced data. These are all things that people are worried about, and reasonably so. These are things that we would be worried about also. So we saw a good pronounced level of that. We also saw a pronounced level of fears of privacy, loss of privacy, particularly from healthcare workers. We saw this coming up a lot in terms of how people's health data might become publicly available or used inappropriately or become part of big data sets. So you can see this kind of reaction in these quotes. One of the things we'll point out in this quote, which speaks to our conclusion and what we're suggesting too, is you can see already people are intervening in GenAI. They're building new workplace practices that work around it, that manage it, that constrain it, and they're building new technologies as ways, in-house technologies that are ways to control this also. So these are what we would call situational interventions. It's not an instrumentalist position of don't, use it this way or don't use it that way. These are the rules for using it. It's about, in this context, this is what we can do. And you can already see this in the data that we're finding from the people as they're responding to our survey questions.
And like Tim mentioned, the industry of education training libraries seem to be disproportionately represented in our quantitative data, because I think we are feeling that pressure in higher ed and education broadly. And I think these three quotations really run the gamut in terms of how folks have been reacting in educational spaces. And so there is the sort of sense in the impulse for AI detection, the impulse for policing to sort of maintain traditional writing assignments and or stepping away from writing altogether in the classroom because it is beginning to give this appearance that it's not as epistemically sound as it once was with the intervention of AI. But then there's also the sense in which stepping away, but beginning to rethink pedagogies. How can you incorporate AI into writing assignments, especially in online spaces and asynchronous spaces here in the middle? And then here at the end, a K-12 educator really trying to, wanting to integrate the technology while still maintaining that sense of personal development of voice at this sort of like preteen, tween kind of age. And so there's a lot of different kinds of impulses that we're seeing happen in the educational space. We had a handful of quotes that were from a range of industries, and we don't want to call them predictions, but it's at least what these alumni are trying to, or at least what they're seeing and what they're anticipating may happen. So we already are seeing this person as a team leader as building ChatGPT into the process of their team. They are either beginning that brainstorming space, or if they have a draft of something, they are going to seek feedback from the tool. And then down here, the second quote is really trying to forecast what may happen in terms of what writing looks like, and this shift to more of an editing, reviewing, rather than completely generating from scratch. This is something that aligns with what we've seen in writing studies in workplace research, where more often than not, you are not going to be drafting something completely out of thin air. Chances are you're going to be working with pre-existing materials that another team has written, that has been part of company culture for decades, and it's up to you to then kind of repurpose that to rhetorical situations. And I feel like that may, at least for me, I won't speak for Tim and Paula, but knowing that is how professional writing has already been sort of evolving, integrating AI into these processes is less scary to me personally, I'll say, because this is what professional writers are already doing. But we're also seeing that ethical concern in terms of plagiarism there as well. Up here, I truncated this quotation too much. This is from a professional in the medical field, and specifically, trained by doctors, but also nothing by people that know nothing on the subject matter. And to me, I was sort of reading this in terms of writing studies. We think of generative AI as being a writing first tool, or that's really where we're feeling the pressure of generative AI is in writing. And so the same sort of sense, it is being used by non-writing experts, it's being trained by non-writing experts, and this is another opportunity for us to intervene at the disciplinary level, but then also thinking about, Elon named specifically as a space where we can begin to be on the forefront of generative AI. And then this is a person in education at the bottom, is really trying to think about what's next for students, how we can better prepare students for what's happening in the world beyond the university, and trying to think about ways in which we might develop a new status quo in a post-AI world. And that leads us to our interventions.
So we previewed these before with you, and we previewed a little bit about what we're going to preview about with you, which is what these will not do. So again, our orientation is to take an interventionist orientation. So it'll be disappointing to an instrumentalist position, because the instrumentalist position would be looking for, give me a set of rules for how to use this, and just let me follow the rules. And there are no rules, is what we're saying. There's contextual intervention, and that is the best way to intervene in this. So we're not going to resolve conflicts or answers with what should I do, which is what everybody's looking for. What should I do? And the hard part is, again, as we started with, we have to enter the scene of struggle, and we need to do it in educated ways. So that's our jobs. That's our responsibilities as citizens. That's the work that we have ahead of us. We're not going to point the way to proceed in ways of acting. We're not going to define good and bad ways of using AI. We're not also going to take a substantive position. You're never going to satisfy a substantive position anyway, because they already think that there's a determinant position that's built into the technology, and once it's out, everything's already determined. So we can't solve that. The only way to solve that is to say, you're just going to go away and not deal with AI at all. This is a new building. The conditioning, the air we have going on in this building, every seat that you have in this building, all the tabletops that you're leaning on, all of this has had AI built to do it somewhere along in the building process, in the logistics of getting it from one place to another. If you travel, your airlines use AI. If you use a library, there's AI systems inside of libraries. If you use a bank, there's AI systems in bank. It's what I call ambient. So you can't swat it away, because ambient can't be swatted away. It's everywhere. It's ubiquitous. And so the substantive position would say, hey, let's just try to hide away from this. You can't. So you got to intervene. You got to find some way to do something about it, and that's what we're trying to take the position on here. So what will we do? We will identify some ways to intervene strategically into this technology, to intervene strategically into its ethical formation, and we do this from within our field, and our field is very context and situated oriented. So this is the nature of our field. It's always about, you're in a context, you're in a situation, how do you respond to it? There aren't rules across all situations. There are better and worse ways to respond to situations. So this is very natural to our field and the way we learn to think. So this is the kind of work that we're going to be developing here. So we already forecast these. We have essentially 4 broad categories of intervention. One is to approach GenAI as a partner, collaborator, and interlocutor. And we'll get into that a little bit more in a second. To develop and teach prompt engineering, of course, from a rhetorical perspective, is what we'll be advancing. To develop advanced writing pedagogies that integrate GenAI, both at the invention level, which is the coming up with your basic ideas, working through the beginning part of writing, and also at the more advanced drafting and revising stages, where we saw power users starting to integrate this more. This is an area that's ripe for some intervention and some development. And then also to develop individualized training modules that are aimed at cross-contextual writing and transfer. So interventions, our first one, to approach GenAI as a partner, collaborator, and interlocutor. This again raises up that point that we've been raising throughout this, is that GenAI is augmenting writing, not replacing writing. So let's find ways to work with it as a partner. How do humans and machines work well together? And there's work for us to be doing that. There's already been a ton of work on that and across a variety of fields. How do we integrate GenAI as a partner in this writing process? Again, as we're saying, it's a part of augmenting the writing process. And then how do we develop contextual iterative strategies that are not plagiarizing and theft? It's plagiarizing and theft if it's not in context. If you're just stealing something that was created in one place and adapting it into another place, that's theft. What we're talking about is in context, so in a specific situation, and then building intervention strategies, particularly thinking about the GenAI as a partner and collaborator. In this context, how am I going to bring this technology in to help me do this work? Second, we propose that we develop and teach prompt engineering. Again, prompt engineering is a collaborative activity. We see this as an emerging rhetorical strategies. There's new ones that will develop, except one of the things I also see coming up, and I know one of our last speakers spoke to how we're learning how to speak to GenAI in a way that will bring back more effective responses. And one of that is brings back a field of interpersonal communication that saw its heyday a while ago. It's kind of vanished for a while. There's another area in our field called secondary orality. I think we're moving to a third orality kind of orientation. These are all ways of saying, when you speak to the machine, the more interpersonal and the more human it is, actually what we're finding is the better it becomes as a collaborator for you. So this is something for us to continue to study and work on and see how we can do that. And then also to help develop contextual and situal ways of working with this ethically. Again, this is part of our big point.
Okay, our third intervention involves developing advanced writing pedagogies that integrate AI.
And so Paula and I have been doing that in our classes for first year writing, as well as in professional writing and rhetoric courses. In first year writing, really trying to develop that idea of an inventional tool, really giving students a prompt or an assignment, and then guiding them through some prompting, some process to prompt with AI to develop ideas, and then conferencing with them verbally to really sort of work as a set of three interlocutors, if you will, in order to really sort of refine their ideas. And then in a more traditional sort of academic inquiry project, having them prompt for ideas that they're curious about and having 10 to 12 possible frameworks, possible angles, then choosing 2 or 3 of those and expanding that into 3 to 5 possible research questions. Not just having them sort of pick and choose from a menu or something, but really encouraging them to follow their curiosity and try to blend different aspects of those ideas as a way of thinking about it as an epistemic tool that they can work alongside with.
And I'll just add that it's possible that the emergence of AI may bring about kind of a resurgence of the importance of invention in the writing process. Because right now, we say you should invent throughout the writing process, but we know people tend to think of it in a linear way. I do this, I invent, I brainstorm, then I write and I draft. But with AI, we find you can go back and engage in critical thinking more often in an inventional sort of way throughout the writing process, which is really exciting. It's kind of AI getting us out of our stupor of thinking this is how you write. It's really exciting, and it's bringing the importance of invention and brainstorming throughout the writing process to play in our classes quite a bit, I would say. And that is relating to critical thinking. There's a lot of concern that students will just turn to AI and they'll take the output and use that, and they won't be engaging in critical thinking. But with invention as an important part of the writing process, I think that it could really engage us in critical thinking in deeper, more thoughtful ways.
And sort of thinking through advanced drafting and revising, it allows myself as a professional writing and rhetoric instructor to push more toward that high-level metacognition I've been sort of thinking about it in terms of writing is no longer nouns in front of verbs. We have a machine that will put the nouns in front of verbs for us. What matters is the rhetorical thinking, how we take that, like Tim was saying, how do we shape it for a specific purpose? How do we shape it for a particular audience and even shift between audiences based on that initial output? And that's the kind of rhetorical metacognition that we really want to develop in those kinds of writing spaces. And so that's something that we're already starting to develop in our courses.
And anecdotally, when we work with students and we experiment, and if you've experimented yourself to use AI to write, if you ask it to write everything, if you say, write this for me, you get it's flat, it's not meaningful, it's not in context. So it's really at the higher level metacognitive parts of the writing process that AI can be beneficial. I think, Tim, did you have the fourth one? Or did we? Did you have the fourth one?
No, but I can.
We can speak to it.
Yeah.
Okay, I wasn't sure. So we talked about developing individualized training modules aimed at cross-contextual writing transfer, and we saw this with individuals in the U.S. seeking out AI training that's transferable and for foundational skills like prompt engineering. So since it is individually motivated, it would be appropriate for the field of writing studies and rhetoric to think about developing these kind of training modules that would focus not on how to do something specific on the job, but what we do in rhetoric, in professional writing and rhetoric all the time. We don't teach somebody how to do something, but to ask the right questions and to understand different toolkits of rhetorical skills they could draw from. So very much in a similar way.
And I think just to add, and this is something that maybe we would appreciate y'all's input on, is there is the idea of the asynchronous module, and we have to go back to our quantitative data. We did ask alums' preferences for their the medium in which they would like to sort of receive AI training from the university. And so modules was an option for that, and I believe it was a popular one. But really trying to think beyond just a module that we plug into Moodle, what this also looks like potentially as maybe an open access resource that can be used sort of across disciplines, and think not just modules, but also new pedagogical materials and possibly even sort of textbooks at that kind of level as well.
This is the one you had, sorry.
This is the last one. And there is a potential also of developing technologies that do this. I know it's more of a writing kind of tool. Anybody use Eli? You use Eli. Anybody else use it? It's a. You want to describe Eli, Jesse?
It's a peer feedback tool. Cindy also said yes, so she can join up. There you go. It is really intended to support a feedback culture, so that students can get feedback from their peers, but then they can also reflect on that feedback and think about how it's going to prompt their revisions. They can also rate the feedback that they get so that students learn to become better at giving feedback. And instructors can also give meta feedback on all parts of those processes.
Great, thank you for describing it. And that's a technology. It's not a module, it's not a textbook, it's actually technology. You like download it and you do it and you use it. It's technology that you use. It was developed by writing studies specialists at Michigan State University as a very similar kind of intervention that we're suggesting here. That is, if technologies are going to write us, why don't we write the technologies that are going to write us? So that's part of, there are ways for us to intervene literally in the development of technologies. And to Mustafa's point earlier on, that could be a great collaborative, cross-disciplinary kind of activity to work on, is how do you develop modules that are technologies that people could actually, that would prompt the kind of activity we're talking about here. So what are our next steps? This is the last bit, y'all, and then we can take questions. We're putting the last, dotting the last I's and crossing our last T's on a article that is basically reporting out on what we've just talked about, but a little bit more substantive discussion of it that we'll be sending out. We plan on doing, we requested interviews. Would people be willing to do that? And some said they would, and so we're gonna go back and do interviews, particularly of power users. In our survey from the first survey, we're gonna repeat this and see how it shows. You saw us talking about how we think this is gonna change. I know my practice has changed over the last year. And then follow emerging patterns as we start to see what comes out of this, which is exciting. That's part of the exciting part about this. So we appreciate y'all being here, and now we're ready to take questions you might have. Thank you very much.